Do you think you watch movies carefully? But what about the hidden details right in front of your eyes that no one else notices? Some are hidden in a shadow, some are concealed in a sound. But once you notice them, they'll make you watch the movie with a whole new perspective. Today, we're embarking on a cinematic journey filled with hidden details that no one notices. But once you hear about them, you'll wonder, how did I miss that?
This is what you give me to work with? Well, honey, I've seen worse.
In the film Mulan, the character's frequent hair stroking has an interesting origin. Animators noticed that Ming-Na Wen, the voice actress for Mulan, often touched her hair while recording her lines. The animators who made this observation decided to add this movement as a small detail to Mulan's character. This small but personal touch adds depth to Mulan's on-screen presence, reflecting the actress's natural mannerisms and contributing to the character's realism. By adding this gesture, the animators not only paid tribute to Ming-Na Wen's performance, but also enhanced the character's believability and relatability. Robert Eggers' film, The Lighthouse, appears at first glance to be the story of two lighthouse keepers descending into madness. However, Eggers uses the direction of light throughout the film to convey the character's psychological breakdown. In each scene, the angle of the light shifts from one character to another. When the film begins, the light always hits Willem Dafoe's character. As the story progresses, the direction of the light shifts to Robert Pattinson. This is not just a cinematographic choice. Eggers shows the transfer of power here. The most striking detail is in the film's final scene, when Pattinson's eyes burn as he looks at the sunlight. The sun is God here. Eggers drew inspiration for this scene from Prometheus in Greek mythology, the moment when the man who stole fire is punished. So the film is not a story of madness, but a mythological tragedy where questioning God turns into punishment.
You'll see soon enough.
Every 18 hours, a door opens up. That's where we go in.
Another example is hidden in Denis Villeneuve's film Arrival. On the surface, the film is the story of a linguist trying to communicate with aliens. However, Villeneuve's intention is much deeper. Arrival is actually a cinematic interrogation of how we perceive time. The film treats time not as a linear concept, but as a cyclical one. However, we feel this not only in the script, but in the entire formal structure of the film. Villeneuve's greatest mastery lies not only in telling the story, but in transforming the film's form into the story's concept. Throughout the film, the camera moves almost exclusively to the right. This signifies that human consciousness experiences time moving forward, because we perceive time as always flowing in the same direction, from past to future, like a line flowing from left to right. By moving the camera in this direction, Villeneuve implants a linear sense of time into the viewer's subconscious. However, at the moment of rupture, when Louise begins to decipher the alien's language and perceive time differently, the camera reverses its direction of movement. Now a flow to the left begins. This is an unnoticed but conscious choice. At the cinematographic level, the film rewinds its own flow of time. Villeneuve's visual language supports this theme. The cold blue tones used in the opening represent the unknown and entropy. As the film progresses, these tones shift to warm amber hues. This signifies that as Louise's consciousness expands, fear gives way to acceptance. The color transitions are so gradual, they go unnoticed. However, in one scene near the end, even the direction of the light on the wall has changed. This is visual proof that time is no longer linear. If you've watched this video this far, know that every piece of content is prepared with serious effort. There are hours of research, writing, and editing behind it. If you want these kinds of videos to continue, subscribing to the channel really makes a difference. It won't bother you, but it will be a great motivation for me. Thank you in advance for your support.
얘들아, 우리가 지금
Bong Joon-ho's film Parasite also features a similar mastery of visual storytelling. Throughout the film, class division is conveyed not only through the characters' dialogue, but also through the use of vertical space. The wealthy Park family lives in an elevated part of the city. The poor Kim family lives in the basement. This difference is already known. However, there is another layer that few people notice: the rain scene. After the rain, as the Kim family returns home, the camera moves downward, but the next day, when the Park family celebrates in their garden, the camera moves upward. There is a camera axis between the two scenes, and this axis is never broken throughout the film. Bong Joon-ho thus visually maintains the spatial hierarchy without drawing attention to it. Even the camera does not take the side of the rich. Therefore, Parasite not only narrates class conflict, but also renders the language of cinema itself class-based.
His father died? A surgeon never kills a patient. An anesthesiologist can kill a patient, but a surgeon never can.
The influence of Stanley Kubrick is evident in Yorgos Lanthimos' The Killing of a Sacred Deer, but very few viewers notice how Lanthimos consciously transforms this influence. In the early part of the film, the camera is generally symmetrical, high, and fixed. These frames represent a godlike gaze, giving the viewer a detached sense of authority that observes the characters from above. However, as the story progresses, the camera slowly descends, aligns with the characters, and begins to show the world from their eye level. This change occurs almost imperceptibly, but it represents the loss of power of the man trying to play God. Lanthimos ingrains this difference into our subconscious. The camera is now at human eye level because the characters have begun to witness the consequences of their actions. Especially in the hospital corridor scenes, the symmetry of the ceiling lights symbolizes the figure of God. However, throughout the film, those lights gradually dim, flicker, and eventually disappear almost completely. This visual change corresponds directly to the mythological reference in the film's title. A sacred order has been disrupted and divine power is taking its revenge. In the final scene, the restaurant's flat, horizontal framing shows that no divine gaze remains. God has abandoned the earth and humanity is attempting to establish its own justice in a misguided manner.
Made a mistake! Get away from the window.
Paul, are you okay?
No.
Why'd you do it? You put your face out there for him to see.
The subject of David Fincher's film Zodiac is journalists pursuing a serial killer. However, Fincher's real game is to trap the viewer in the rhythm of the film without them noticing. Throughout the film, there is a wall calendar hanging in the background in every scene in journalist Graysmith's office. But the dates on that calendar never change. Years pass, events unfold, characters age, but the calendar always shows the same day. This subtle detail conveys Fincher's central idea. Time appears to pass, but obsession freezes consciousness at a single point. Additionally, the ticking clock effect heard several times throughout the film is not directly related to the scene. Sometimes it interrupts outside the office, sometimes in a completely silent moment. This sound mimics the characters' heartbeats. Fincher hides the sound within the editing to create a constant feeling of time standing still in the viewer's subconscious. There is a similar manipulation in the color palette. Gray and green tones, combined with the light never changing, further solidify the sense of time. At the end of the film, the same gloom remains because there is no resolution in the story, just as there is no resolution in Graysmith's mind. Zodiac is not a thriller, but a cinematic portrait of how time is killed by obsession. In Alex Garland's film Ex Machina, details are hidden beneath minimalist surfaces. Every glass panel, every shiny surface in the film actually represents a character's point of view. The transparent walls used in Nathan's laboratory are not just about transparency, but a metaphor for surveillance and control. In every scene, whoever is looking at whom, the power passes to that person. The camera language also follows this balance. The observing character is in a wide frame. The observed character is in a narrow frame. However, in the final scene, the robot Ava is not reflected in the mirror. This is one of Garland's finest details. Because Ava is no longer a reflection, she is the subject of her own consciousness. The character we constantly see within glass surfaces throughout the film finally breaks free from reflection. Garland planned this moment as the scene where artificial intelligence gains a soul. The light softens, the background sounds completely fade away. Only a slight breathing sound remains. This breath is no longer human, but that of a new consciousness. That silence represents the space humanity has left to its own creation. In this sense, Ex Machina is not just a film about technology, but about the process of liberation from reflection in existence. In Paul Thomas Anderson's Phantom Thread, fashion designer Reynolds Woodcock's world is built on perfection and control. However, Anderson conveys how this control collapses with just a sound. In one of the film's quietest scenes, the breakfast scene, the high-pitched sound heard when the fork touches the porcelain plate is the loudest sound in the film. This detail is insignificant to most viewers, but Anderson uses it to convey the breaking point of madness on an auditory level. The director used special microphones for this scene to amplify the metallic frequency frequency of the sound. As a result, the audience feels uncomfortable, even if they are not consciously aware of it. This is one of the rare examples of sensory manipulation in cinema. Anderson parallels the uncontrollability of sound with the character's inner world. For Reynolds, perfection becomes inaudible. Sound transforms into a disruptive foreign element. That moment is when the character becomes a victim of his own obsession, and the meaning of all the silence in the film is shattered by that single sound.
You're in a company now. You have to find your right place. You have to decide. What is it you want to be for this company?
Luca Guadagnino's remake of Suspiria hides a visual code that is much more complex than it appears. The mirrors on the walls in the dance scenes are not real. They are entirely digitally created. However, Guadagnino has added a 0.5-second reflection delay to these mirrors. That is, the reflection moves half a second after the character moves. This tiny difference is imperceptible to the viewer, but creates a subconscious feeling of incongruity. This is because the brain expects the movement and the reflection to be synchronized. This delay is the visual counterpart of the witch's power to control time. Furthermore, the tones of the light reflected in the mirrors change throughout the film. Initially cold white, the reflections turn red as the story progresses. This is a metaphor for time being stained with blood. Guadagnino's magic creates fear, not from darkness, but from distortion in the image. This is why Suspiria's dance scenes are unsettling, because the image does not conform to its own reality.
I told you not to fuss.
And yet... Voila. Bon appetit. I missed you, baby sweet.
In Blade Runner 2049, Denis Villeneuve subverts the original film's symbolic color codes to convey a different message to the audience's subconscious. In the first film, orange tones represented humanity, while blue tones represented artificiality. However, in 2049, these symbols are reversed. Kay's scenes are warm, orange tones. Humans are shown in cold blue environments. This visual choice conveys Villeneuve's message that humanity is no longer a biological identity, but an emotional quality. Furthermore, the vibrations of the hologram character Joy in the film are not random. Digital analysis reveals that the sequence of these vibrations spells out "I am real" in Morse code. This hidden detail is an Easter egg known only to the film's effects team. Villeneuve thus uses visual code to convey the existential anguish of even an artificial being. Blade Runner 2049 suggests that the difference between humans and machines is not in the image, but in the color.
Unbelievable.
Welcome and happy midsummer. Skål!
The wall paintings seen in the opening scene of Ari Aster's Midsummer summarize the entire film, but the real hidden plan is about color and light. The color transitions beneath the wall paintings foreshadow the order in which the characters will die. Each death is represented by a darkening tone in that painting. Aster also applies an extra moisture effect to the leaves of the flowers in the first minutes of the film. This foreshadows the sunburned color tones in the scenes that follow. Even the bright scenes throughout the film are not peaceful because Aster uses a 10% larger aperture. This creates an unnatural whiteness in the image. The viewer is forced to squint without realizing it. This creates a subconscious discomfort reflex. Here, Aster conveys that even daytime can be dark. Fear is hidden not in darkness, but in excessive brightness. This is precisely the nightmare of Midsummer. Everything is visible, but nothing is comprehensible.
See, I'm not a monster. I'm just ahead of the curve.
Have all these rules, and you think they'll save you.
The subtle details underlying Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker in The Dark Knight make the character one of the most complex figures in cinema history. Most viewers don't pay attention to the Joker's police mugshot, yet that photo is the only window into the character's past. In that frame, the Joker doesn't smile. His face is completely expressionless. Ledger requested this photo himself because that moment represents the Joker before he crossed the threshold into madness. In other words, that photo is the last trace of the human before the chaos. Ledger wanted to portray the Joker not just as a criminal mastermind, but as a character consumed by his own traumas. This idea continues visually in the later parts of the film with the way the makeup breaks down. In each scene, the Joker's face paint smudges a little more. The lipstick bleeds beyond the lip line. The white paint runs with sweat. Nolan deliberately planned this change with the makeup team, because throughout the film, the Joker's face becomes chaos itself. While the makeup starts out controlled and symmetrical, after each crime, the face becomes more random and disorderly. This is a visual calendar of the character's descent into madness.
Yourself? Yes, but it's okay. Marla, look at me. I'm really okay. Trust me.
In Fight Club, David Fincher tells not only a character story, but also the invisible system of the modern world. And he does this through small visual tricks throughout the film. The most famous one is the appearance of the character Tyler Durden in a few frames before they meet. In the first half of the film, Tyler appears on screen in a single frame every 10 minutes, in one place next to a photocopier, in another on a television screen. These images are so brief that most viewers don't notice them, but this is a subconscious sign that Tyler is slowly beginning to appear in the main character's mind. Fincher uses a neuroscience rule here. The eye sees 24 frames per second, but the 25th frame cannot be reached by consciousness. So we don't notice that we see Tyler, but our brain begins to feel that image. Fincher's real trick, however, is hidden in the final scene. If you look closely at the screen as the buildings collapse, the Starbucks logo appears for a moment. This is not just an Easter egg, but the director's ideological signature, because throughout the film, brands are constantly present in the background, like the invisible gods of modern life. Coffee cups, IKEA catalogs, Levi's ads, all are symbols of the order Tyler rebels against. And in the finale, the brief appearance of the logo, even as the entire system collapses, carries Fincher's dark joke. Everything collapses, but the brands remain. The color palette also reinforces this message. At the film's start, cold grey-blue tones represent the monotony of city life. With Tyler's appearance, the scenes become warmer, more contrasting, and shift to orange-like tones. This is the energy of rebellion. However, in the end, blue reigns supreme again in the light of the explosion. Order cyclically returns. So Fight Club is not a story of freedom. It is a cinematic demonstration that even rebellion is swallowed up by the system.
Help!
The dream sequence where Hugh Glass encounters his dead wife is not just an emotional moment, but a symbolic map of the subconscious. The stain on the church wall in the background briefly forms the silhouette of a bear. This image was not added with CGI. Iñárritu created the effect with real smoke and wind direction. Cinematographer Emanuel Lubezki waited for the wind to use the smoke like a natural brush in this scene, which is why the shot was repeated 5 times. The meaning of this detail is profound. The bear here is not only Glass's enemy, but also his own inner savagery. That stain shows that even in God's temple, the predatory nature of man remains unvanquished. At that moment, the character Glass confronts not only his losses, but also his own animal side. Furthermore, throughout the dream sequence, the camera moves just above ground level, as if from an animal's perspective. This shift in perspective allows the audience to enter that instinctual realm alongside Glass. When Glass looks up at the sky again at the end of the film, the smoke reverses direction. Nature's cycle is complete, but the character's inner cycle remains open.
You do understand that they can't let you leave.
Going somewhere?
In Shutter Island, during Teddy Daniels' interrogation scene, there is a cut the moment he picks up the water glass, and the glass suddenly disappears. This was debated for years as an editing mistake, but Martin Scorsese specifically manipulated this frame, because throughout the film, water represents the trauma Daniels has suppressed. He lost his children to water, and his consciousness rejects this object. During editing, Scorsese had the glass digitally removed from that frame. His aim was for the viewer to witness a mental censorship without realizing it. Furthermore, the camera perspective is also distorted in that scene. When the woman takes the water from her hand, the camera is at shoulder height on the right. After the cut, it shifts to the left shoulder. This also disrupts the viewer's spatial perception. Thus, not only the glass, but the entire spatial logic of the scene disappears, just like Teddy's mind. This technique is not repeated in any other scene in the film. Here, Scorsese deliberately breaks cinema's continuity rule along with the character's trauma. That's why the scene feels uncomfortable to watch, but the reason is unclear. In fact, our subconscious senses are lack just like the character.
Since when did cold water become faster than Laurel? Huh? What was it thinking there? I didn't ask that to hear myself speak.
Because, you know, cold water only has 6 lights.
In Nightcrawler, the radio constantly playing in Louis Bloom's car seems, on the surface, to be merely ambient noise. However, if you listen carefully, you notice that the same female voice echoes in the background of all the news bulletins throughout the film. Her tone varies so little that it seems as if all the news is being read by a single person. This is a subconscious sound design planned by director Dan Gilroy. Gilroy had all the news dialogues read by the same voice artist during the film's sound mixing, then split them into different channels using artificial frequency filters. But the fundamental frequency of each voice remains fixed at 320 Hz. In other words, all the different news stories in the city come from the same source. This hidden detail is directly linked to the film's theme of media monopoly. Lewis's story appears to be one of individual rise, but he actually becomes part of a single voice system. The music playing in the car also supports the same theme. Whenever Lewis approaches the crime scene, frequency interference is heard on the radio, an auditory metaphor for false freedom.
All of this is one little girl's bedroom, every moment. It's infinitely complex. They have access to infinite time and space, but they're not bound by anything. They can't find a specific place in time.
In Interstellar, when Cooper enters the black hole, the dust particles floating between the bookshelves in the Tesseract scene are not merely visual atmosphere. Nolan and the effects team programmed the particle movements in this scene according to Morse code. Each dust particle is synchronized to spell out the word stay. This word is already the dramatic center of the film, the only vital sentence Cooper says to his daughter. But the detail doesn't end there. The direction of the dust particles also consciously moves against the flow of time. Visually, it appears to fall from top to bottom, but according to the direction of the light, it actually moves in reverse. Thus, the idea of communication against time is woven into the form of the scene, both physically and emotionally. In this scene, Nolan has also mixed the film's music backwards. Hans Zimmer's organ sounds are actually a reversed version of the melody theme at the beginning of the film, so both visually and orally, the film produces its own echo within itself. That's why a feeling of recall arises while watching the scene. The conscious mind doesn't notice, but the brain senses that reverse flow.
사랑해요, 아저씨.
In the hypnosis scene at the end of Oldboy, as Dae-soo walks through the snow-covered field, a small but unsettling difference can be noticed when looking closely at the shadow behind him. That shadow does not belong to him. Its posture is straighter, its shoulders broader, its gait is different from Dae-soo's, almost identical to that of the younger Woo Jin. This detail is one of the film's darkest symbols. Park Chan-wook achieved this effect not with digital methods, but entirely on set by playing with the direction of the light. During filming, he placed the two actors, Choi Min-sik and Yoo Ji-tae, in the same light angle one after the other, superimposing two different shadows. The viewer thinks they are watching a single shot, but in fact, that scene is the moment when two different times, two different spirits collide. This clever trick makes us question the impression that Dae-soo has woken up from hypnosis. Perhaps he hasn't woken up. Perhaps he has merely reshaped his trauma into a new form. Because in that scene, not only the shadow changes, but the sound changes too. The wind heard in the background is at the same frequency as that heard only in Woo Jin's childhood memory in the film's earlier sections. This is a conscious method of connection employed by the director. The wind now comes not from nature, but from the past. Thus, the fates of the two characters become intertwined. Revenge becomes an endless cycle, experienced not between individuals, but between different faces of the same spirit. The hypnosis scene is therefore not merely a conclusion. The film restarts itself. As the camera slowly pulls away, the direction of the wind does not change. That is, reality is still spinning in the same place. The blank expression on Dae-soo's face conveys unconscious surrender rather than peace. The viewer thinks he has been saved, but his shadow belongs to someone else. Oldboy thus draws the viewer into an endless hypnosis. The film ends, but the mind remains there. Well, I think today we've taken a look at the unknown side of films by talking about the hidden details and Easter eggs you may not have noticed. I hope these details have left you with a feeling of, wow, I never noticed that. So, which movie has details and Easter eggs you never noticed? Don't forget to mention them in the comments. Also, I'd be thrilled if you shared your ideas for video content you'd like to see in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video for more.